Hello everybody. Welcome. I'm out for a night walk, so tonight's walk and talk will just be a recording. The starfield is ancient and beautiful. And there are a number of trees around here that are blooming and filling the air with a complex fragrance. So, I want to talk tonight about a principle or idea. And in a sense, it's a simple thing. It's the idea of a function. In math, this has a certain kind of meaning. In programming, it has a related meaning. In language, we imagine that words have functions. They are pointers, and phrases have functions. There's different kinds of phrases that do different things or accomplish different purposes according to how the speaker employs them. And our world and our language are extremely utilitarian. They are structured to function, to get things done. If we take that phrase very seriously, from a certain perspective, it would mean something unexpected. To put an end to things, to get them finished, right? To put an end to them. Which is interesting from the perspective of awakening or liberation. In some way, these ideas or processes or events or happenings, they may put an end for some time to our hypnotic entrancement with the ongoing babble of our minds and the world and the way our waking mind becomes trained to structure ideas of the self, reality, relationships, and so on. We have an unusual word in English, and it's not clear to me where it comes from, but many ancient cultures have a similar idea. It's the idea of a demon. And a demon isn't just one thing. Like all of our words, what it means depends on context and history and those who are present and how they are communicating together and why they are communicating together and so on. In the BSD computing environment, which includes Linux and Mac OS and a number of other operating systems, there's this idea of a demon, and I think it's Deamon, if I remember right. Or is it Dae? I can't recall now. And what that is it's a process that wakes up under certain conditions. When certain conditions are fulfilled, the process wakes up, it does some stuff, and then it goes back to being senescent or inactive. And most of our habits of thought and activity and relation are really like this. This computational analogy is a result of how we experience life. It's a derivative result of how our waking minds enact themselves throughout our lives. We become habituated to paying attention to certain things and not to others, doing certain things and not others, thinking certain ways and not others, seeing certain ways and not others. And so over time we have this collection of processes that one could say governs most of our waking awareness, unless something should penetrate that process and cause it to collapse or transform. Awakening or enlightenment are words we use to talk about a situation that resembles that description, where suddenly we are free of the vastly layered overlays of habit, thinking, reactivity, desire, suffering, fear, adoration, so on. And so when we are freed of these things, other senses blossom into our awareness. In dreaming, we have a different experience. And the waking mind can't really explain the dreaming experience or even describe it well, because they're so different ordinarily. I think in our childhood, we easily dreamed while awake. In fact, that was our common state. We called it play. We wanted to play, which really meant a mode or a library of modes of dreaming while awake together, with and for each other. Over time, those got evicted from our common waking awareness, and we grew up, quote unquote. We became grown-ups. And I think of that word often as G-R-O-A-N. Groaning. Like, groaning up. And I suppose that in the state of deep dreamless sleep, we are completely free of both of these processes. I was speaking with a friend the other night, and we were talking about problems we have with our waking minds. Worry is a good one. Anger is another one. Those would suffice. There's all kinds of suffering we undergo. And some of the suffering is active suffering, like, ow, this is hurting me right now, in some way. And some of it's passive suffering, ow, I am starving for love, or interesting conversation, or play, or creativity, or depth in my life. Right? There's these different kinds of suffering. And there are myriad kinds of suffering, if we want, to make catalogs about them. Which probably isn't useful. It certainly doesn't serve my purpose, but we enact processes that are familiar to us. And even as children we were doing something similar. It's just that the dreaming processes were more familiar, so we played. And this seems to me a great tragedy and a great impoverishment, because most of the time we're being run by processes. Instead of us choosing to run processes, we're being run by processes. And this is part of why many people are angry about governments and so on, because the governments are like gigantic, tangled messes of demons. And one of the features of demons is that they don't really care about anything but running the process that keeps them dominant. Right? that keeps feeding them energy. They're endlessly hungry for energy. The energy of life, the energy of dreaming, the energy of creativity and imagination and love. They want to eat all this stuff up and churn out machines and subprocesses and things like this. And you can see this very clearly if you look at any institution, like a bank or a grocery store or a neighborhood, a city, a country. You can see this happening. You can see a tangled swarm of competing demons. Sometimes I call them thrisps. So I noticed when I was speaking with my friend that it's very difficult to get a human who has been trapped by one of these processes, or a demon or an array of demons. And I'm not speaking of them metaphysically right now. I'm not speaking of like those beings that are very mean and malignant and live in hell and serve the devil and so on. I'm not speaking of that. Though, it's not an unrelated topic. But I'm talking about it very pragmatically, as if there were no such beings like that. So most of us are trapped in these habits, and I have a habit where I bring to mind something that I find frightening or that makes me angry, that I can't solve. Right? I can't solve the thing. I've tried for years to solve this thing. I can't solve it. Tried everything I could think of. It's still there. And one of the ideas we have is that we should stop doing things that aren't healthy for us. This could be enacting some addiction, and that could be to anger even. But it could also be to alcohol or cigarettes or drugs or sex or gambling or some food-based behavior, either binging or purging or cutting, any kind of a thing we might imagine. And it's when I have this problem with my own mind, what doesn't work for me very well at all is to try to not do it. Because it's very difficult to not do something. There's a kind of an urge or an urgency or a space in which a habit has been enacted many times over our history. And that space has a kind of gravity. So under circumstances of stress, we tend to give in to the gravity in various ways that are unique to each of us and our life phases and so on. So it's very hard to simply say like, well, don't do that thing. Don't bring that problem to mind. Right? Not impossible. Sometimes that can work, but hard, really hard. And the reason is that there's a space within our what I might think of as our enaction body over time, where we have cut grooves into this space, so to speak. And so if we get too near the edge of the groove, we tend to fall into it and reenact it. So one of the things that is helpful, instead of trying to not do something that is harmful to us or that we would like to remove from our lives, is to do something else instead. To create a diversion so that when I notice, I'm starting to think about that guy who makes me really angry, who I can't get out of my life, and blah-biddy, blah-biddy. when I notice the onset and I feel the gravity pulling me toward the well-worn groove, I just do something else instead. And I can pick something I like. And this is much more effective in general as a practice that we can all play with while we're awake, to help heal our hearts and our minds and our bodies and our relationships and our world. We can do something beautiful that we trust in that moment, so that as we feel the onset of that familiar gravity, we just chart a new path towards something beautiful. And what this does is it changes the space, so that over time those grooves fill up and become smoothed over, their gravity is reduced, they are no longer compelling, and it fills up the space with things we like to do and feel fulfilled by doing, and are natural to our souls and our hearts. And as that space fills up, the grooves begin to disappear. They just aren't compelling anymore. We've realized that if we just notice the onset of the habit action, we can make a different move, a beautiful move. And, we can experiment with it and play with it and find really good moves to make. When we start to feel that urge or that collapsing inside us or that compulsion, we can turn in another direction that establishes new space. And what happens over time is that space fills up with good things. And now it's very difficult for the sort of demonic habits to intrude, because the space becomes filled with good things. Ecological niches are like this. When a space is opened up because we cut down a bunch of trees or we kill the alpha predators or something like that, always problems happen now. Trouble happens. The soil erodes, the riverbanks collapse, the food chain breaks up, food circle breaks up, and the terrain gets dominated by certain animals or situations that seem, at least to us, to be undesirable, or a reduction in diversity. Yeah? So now there are fewer opportunities than there would ordinarily be. And this is what happens when we are trapped in processes like those that plague us in our modern experience. It's a great denuding of the natural diversity and novelty of our interior world. So this has been on my mind since my conversation. I wanted to speak about it briefly and share this with you. And I hope some of you may find it useful. It is something we have to practice. We sometimes undergo radical changes in a very short time, but often we have to work a bit and practice a bit and use our awareness to notice when we start to feel that gravity that's dragging us in a direction that's very familiar but undesirable, even though it superficially fulfills some urge or compulsion in the moment. And as we establish good and beautiful habits and space within us, again, the power of the gravity is impeded and eventually becomes dissolved. And that's a beautiful moment, because that's a moment of liberation. That's a moment where we regain some of the freedom and liberation that's natural to the kind of animal that we are when we're free of the overlays that otherwise dominate us. So these are my thoughts for this evening. Thank you for joining me. I'm grateful to have this time to walk and learn together. And I hope we'll be doing more of it very soon. Bye-bye for now.